everyone. I'm Matthew Jenejohn, and I'm here to say a few words about our friend John McCann. John passed away in December 2020 at the age of 87. It seems to me that John lived a few lifetimes during those 87 years. We know John as being one of the most important and prominent cornetto builders of the 20th and early 21st centuries. Others knew him through his distinguished and extensive military career. It seems the two combined to highlight the mind and passion of a rather extraordinary individual. Many of us have played on John's beautiful cornetti, noted for their consistent excellence, precision, superb craftsmanship, and elegance. John's cornetto building career spanned 6 decades until he retired from cornetto building a few years ago and moved to sunny California with his wife Kimmy. John has quite an exceptional curriculum vitae. I'll share a few little things here. Some of this information comes from an interview with his friend John Papini. Other than being a cornetto builder, John was a full colonel in the U.S. Army. He served 3 tours of duty in Germany and 2 combat tours in Vietnam, earning 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Air Medals, and 8 Campaign Stars, as well as the Defense Superior Service Medal for what John Riley called 5 years of hard time in the Pentagon. John joined the Army in 1956 and spent several years stationed in Berlin in the late 1950s. John referred to himself on occasion as a spook, and his area of expertise was counterintelligence. Some people would interpret that as a spy, but he never said that. He always said, "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." John also spoke fluent German. While in Berlin, John began his musical career as well. He studied recorder and began discovering other early instruments. He became acquainted with Otto Steinkopf, who was a leader in the building of Renaissance early wind instruments at that time. John became curious as to why a beautiful instrument like the cornetto became extinct nearly 300 years ago. He said, "I wanted to know why it died out. Why was it replaced by the violin?" In 1960, John became interested in learning how to make these rare instruments. His apprenticeship over the next 15 years consisted of much trial and error, experimentation, and research. In fact, many of his vacations, while still in the Army, consisted of visiting museums throughout Europe to examine and measure the cornets on exhibit. With no journeyman master to guide his apprenticeship, he eventually accumulated the necessary tools, skills, and methodology to become a professional manufacturer of cornets of all sizes, many of which have been and are still being used by professional musicians. For the decades that followed, John would make as many as 12 cornets per year, usually on a made-to-order basis. John's passion for making these instruments extended past his retirement from the Army in 1984 and on through his second career in the aerospace industry. John continued building cornets until he was in his early 80s. Throughout his career, John collaborated with many players, and these collaborations helped him further advance his craft. One of these players was Douglas Kirk, who has known John since the early 1970s. When Doug was studying in The Hague from 1976 to 1978, Don Smithers, the cornetto teacher at that time, already owned McCann instruments pitched at A440, A466, and A490, which indicates John was already quite advanced in building historical reproductions of cornettos and sending them overseas at that time. John spent a lot of time studying German collections of original instruments. He also made many museum visits throughout Europe, including to Vienna and Verona, and was very particular about examining the workmanship, the leatherwork, and the tooling in particular. Detlef Haga, a fine cornetto player from Hamburg, took John to see 2 exceptional original instruments in Hamburg in the 1970s. According to Douglas, it was around this time that John decided to get really serious about making the best instruments he could and getting opinions from good players about them. Through the 1980s and 1990s, John often collaborated with Douglas and also a lot with Bill Matthews, sending instruments back and forth for input and evaluation. John was a mentor to me, and I have the good fortune of having learned the craft of cornetto building from him. I became interested in cornetto building in the early 2000s, and after a somewhat failed attempt on my own, I was put in touch with John. Little did I know that would be the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship spanning 2 decades. John taught me how to build cornettos from stage 1. Step by step, he explained things through email and phone calls, as John was in Utah and I was in Montreal. I managed to find my way to Utah a few times and got to see the master's workshop and spend some fun time learning and talking about all things cornetto. When John began teaching me how to make cornets, I tried to return the favor by giving my input into his McCann designs. Curiously, when I visited him in person, he absolutely refused to play even a single note in front of me, so I never even actually heard him play the instrument at all. We collaborated on his new 466 treble designs from that era and cornetini as well. Then John started a new project building copies of the Sam 230 cornetto from the Vienna Kunsthistorischen Museum. In his later years, he would fairly regularly send me cornets in the mail to look over and give my thoughts. He also communicated with Jamie Savan about the Sam 230 model. When John would send boxes of cornets to me to look over, it would usually be accompanied with beautiful pieces of wood for me to use for my own cornets. He would also often send various extra tools he had, and then eventually started sending me many of his regular tools as well. Eventually I received massive shipments of hundreds of pre-cut blanks of plumwood, boxwood, maple, and other woods, and I now have a large collection of 40-year seasoned wood that I use for my own instruments, thanks to John. Corresponding with John was never dull. He had his quirky sense of humor and a typically structured manner in which he approached the steps of cornetto building, surely influenced by his military background. At the same time, he would always let me know what else he was working on, like making reproductions of historical rifles, brewing wheat beer, and whichever interesting musicians he was in contact with throughout all corners of the world. In person, John had a somewhat reserved character at first meeting, but in writing he was quite expressive and open about sharing his thoughts. John was always very kind and extremely generous with me, and never judgmental about what direction I was interested in going with cornetto making. He was always 100% supportive. I do my best to carry on a bit of the McCann tradition in my own cornetto making. John was a great friend to many of us. He will be sorely missed. I've collected many messages, comments, and anecdotes from friends and colleagues that were too numerous to include today. This would have been a 20-minute video. So I will share these thoughts very soon through the Historical Brass Society website. Thank you, and bye for now.